up, all my soul G's? What's up, all my soul G's? Today, I'm bringing you a brand new episode of CGT Podcast. And this episode is going to be very um, based on trying to decipher this whole idea that there's a political spectrum. And at the end of the day, you know, you can make charts out of a lot of stuff based off of reality. And in reality, you can fake reality using math and charts and stuff like that too. So let's take a look at this political chart in many different ways. I got a couple videos lined up in case I just simply get tired of talking about it and I just want somebody else's opinion on the subject. So I'm gonna be real. I typed in different aspects of the political spectrum, and I found two videos. I didn't watch them. I don't watch the videos that I do on my podcast beforehand, just simply because I want to get a live reaction of the sources that I'm getting this stuff from. I got a couple sources that I actually trust from people, but if I can't go to them sources, usually I will just react live right here with y'all, like in the moment. With that being said, y'all take a moment if y'all want to like, share this shit. I mean, subscribing helps too, but I would rather you actually like and share it because I'm not trying to be a full-time content creator. As you can see, I suck at it in terms of like the audio quality stuff. Like outside of that, I'm very good at putting this content in front of your face. It might not be the most presentable, but it is gonna be worth it at the end of the day. So with that being said, when you're dealing with the political spectrum, it's a very interesting tool. And the main thing that brought the main thing that brought this subject to my mind over time was the fact that trying to figure out was the political spectrum is the political spectrum like a psychological weapon, or is it actually a tool to help people identify where their ideas and culture and political output either originates or is founded, where it's what it's founded in. And I can't lie, like over time, the more I question this stuff, like especially in election years and especially over the last 3 years, ever since the 19 shit happened, um, it's just been very interesting politically how, at the beginning of, I don't know if I'm gonna be able to clip this in. Obviously, I told you I'm not the best country creator, but if I could find these clips, I will. There's clips all over from 2020 where there was like this thing going on. Of course, you had the red pill people, the like advocates for men, the advocates for women, gender war, and all this shit going on. But in the midst of that, you had people talking about like the cycle, right? And the cycle at that time was strong men. Like, I don't know if I can find it. It was like strong men make good times. Good times. Yeah, let's see if this actual pull a strong man good times quote. Let me see if I can pull it up in the pictures. Yeah, this it right here. So around this time, I started seeing this picture. I started seeing this quote right here almost everywhere. But specifically because of that time, it was something that the conservatives were really like hard on at that moment, and it just made me not fuck with them more. Like the whole movement during the 19, the C-19, it kind of made me be like, okay, conservatives might got a little bit of common sense. But then when they started doing the CRT and start focusing on stupid shit that ain't got nothing to do with the actual movement of making the country better, you can't say it does, honestly. But outside of that, this was showing up at that same time. Um, Let me read it for y'all. It says, hard times create strong men. We're gonna break this down. Hard times create strong men. Okay, I'm gonna read it before I even critique this stupid shit. Strong men create good times. Okay. Good times create weak men. Good times create weak men, mind you. And weak men create hard times. And at that point, I guess you start to cycle over. When weak men create hard times, then the hard times create strong men. So it's just like these whole, it's like they using all of the character, like grifter terms in terms of like trying to reach out to the men, trying to reach out to young boys and shit. And they trying to put this image out there. They're using all the terms strong, weak, good, bad. Like, and if you're really thinking about it, this is such a like generalized way of seeing reality that you really can't study history at all to understand it. You would have to study history with the lens of a very biased person to even be able to use half of these terms to even make it seem like it's realistic. Strong men create, I mean, hard times create strong men. Let's get this straight. How do you define a hard time? Would you consider a natural disaster a hard time? And would you consider people who were injured during a natural disaster, men or women, injured during a natural disaster? Let's say you got a volcano. During that's a hard time. You got a volcano right there, and during the volcano, let's say somebody get caught in that shit, they lose a foot. Is that gonna make the motherfucker stronger mentally? Maybe mentally, but physically, especially outside of today's world where people actually look out for handicapped people, no, that would be a complete disadvantage. So just starting with the first sentence alone is stupid. And that's why like this whole mind state is what led me to also question the political spectrum. Why? Because the same way that this quote was being misused, or I don't want to say misused because once again I'm not even gonna speculate who wrote the shit. I'm pretty sure they got it right here. G. Michael Hop F. Let's assume that's the person who actually made the quote. G. Michael Hopef, whatever his name is, however you pronounce it. Let's say he's the person who actually created that term. If that's the case, then that means that even like let's say if the case that what he's saying is true, then the political spectrum wouldn't even be here in the first place. And if at the very same time, if what he's saying is a lie, then I mean, and when I say a lie, if what he's saying is I don't know how else to put it, but idiotic. Like it's a very childish way of seeing human interaction through history. It's a very childish and simplistic way of saying it, and you would have to be childish and simplistic to relate to it outside of you and your own personal life. Just want to live up to some like machismo idea of yourself or some shit where other people can't live up to. But with that being said, at the very same time, if what he's since this quote is very misleading, it makes you delusional. It makes you delusional in the sense and where it makes you delusional in the sense and where you're starting to equate and give values to people in life that you never met. You don't know whether or not they've been through hard times, but you would recognize them as a weak man, and you in your own mind at that point are determining whether or not something is strong or weak, and that person is doing the same thing. So at that point, this is why we get to the political spectrum. Is you can apply that very same thought pattern that the way you define this chart, the way you define a political spectrum is based off of the way you define stuff like strong, weak, good, and bad. Those type of words. And if you're the type of person that's a businessman, you don't give a fuck about politics besides trying to secure your bag, then it would benefit you to create a political spectrum because that's a way for you to, advertise that let's like that's a way for you to advertised to people where basically you could understand a point of view. Like the same way businesses advertise to people is the same way the government advertises to people. How do they do that? They get your demographics, psychographics, and they go to work on that shit. Demographics and psychographics. This political chart is like supposed to be like a some fit of both of those things, like demographics and psychographics, and how it affects your political beliefs. And I've seen this political spectrum be thrown in my face so hard for the last umpteen years. I don't even know, like since 2015 when Dump was running, where Trump was running for office, Bernie Sanders and all that was running for office. I ain't like that. Bernie Sanders come out talking about he's a democratic socialist. Trump talking about he trying to make America great again, all that stuff around that time. And that's when I really started hearing this political spectrum shit come out. Like obviously it's based off of America, which automatically, I mean, kind of makes it like bullshit, but I'm gonna say it's limited. It's not bullshit. Let's just call it limited. And that's important because the very same people who will look at a foreign policy issue will be using this political spectrum. The religious right or the conservatives or even the religious left and the liberals or whatever they call it, the whole conservative liberal back and forth bullshit, right? These are the paradigms defined by these people in the Western world, mostly America. And when you go into another country thinking like this, you're gonna fuck. That's why everything that corrupt people in the government, I'll say, uh, everything they do with foreign policy is almost is like completely disastrous, and they get away with it, and they go in there intentionally to do a goal, but they're using this political spectrum in order to see what areas of the society they can depend on to go to war for them, and what areas of the society they can look forward to like trying to like shut down, quiet up while they doing what they need to do, and which side they can get to cancel out the other side so that they can do what they need to do while everybody fighting each other. They still doing what they need to do. And I'm not. I mean, that's a very obvious thing. People know political distractions, and left and right is bull crap. But for people to know that, they are still so heavily engaged in all of this, as if it is real, as if you know there's anything connecting these four squares and to make a XY axis. Anything connecting these four squares to make a XY axis, that's an illusion. There's nothing there connecting those four squares to make an XY axis. Liberalism, libertarianism, socialism, and communitarianism. I guess that's what they're saying. Those things are held together by the illusion in the American government that you have freedom to practice religion, freedom to um, protest, freedom on all of these freedoms you think you have that will actually give you an avenue to rise to power and actually make some type of significant change in your life on a national scale for people who think like you, basically, like in this political square. Um, those are illusions, and they use y'all going hard as fuck for the illusions, basically doing like election years and campaign runs and stuff like that. Not even just that, advertisements for products is it goes a long way. But we're gonna stay right there. They're basing off of this political spectrum. Now, with that being said, I think that's my first dissertation. I'm gonna go into this video. I ain't gonna do the long one first. I like this guy right here, Mr. Beat, and I follow him. I'm subscribed to him on the other channel. But with that being said, he got a video uh explaining the political spectrum. We're gonna check that out just to see from a professor's point of view what this is.
Right-wing superstars went on Fox News And what they did is they spewed the most boring, banal, right-wing talking points I've ever heard.
They spin out hour after hour of slickly produced left-wing propaganda.
And those people have more or less systematically been ignored by people on both the right-hand side and the left-hand side of the political spectrum.
Yeah, on the right, conservatives, you're always talking about taxes and regulations and big government. And on the left, liberals, you're talking about economics. It's always about income inequality, right?
The divide between the left and the right is as bad as it's been in really any of our lifetimes.
You know what? I'm not quite sure that all of these people have the same definitions of the left and the right. What do people mean when they say?
Now, that's key. Like, I just want to remind you, the reason I'm reacting to that already is just because like I said earlier in the video, this is my first time watching this video. And the professor has started off with the same critique that I have, which is the fact that these people define this stuff differently. There is no universal definition of the left, right, and all this other shit. Capitalism, communism, even that. There's no technical definition of it, because you're talking about systems, and systems have to adjust. So whenever you put a defined definition on, that's when shit start going fucked up. And then at that point, you almost have to, so that you can't go outside of those boundaries. So that's why the whole human mistakes, I guess I'll say. With that being said, he's right. Like, these people are defining it in a different ways. And with that being said, you're going to war with somebody about something that you might agree with, but simply because y'all using terms that y'all disagree on the definition of, y'all actually going to war. And that's to the benefit of y'all using the semantical wars, are to the benefit of the people in between all the different wings, the bird itself.
Say left wing or right wing. Well, the whole political spectrum that gave us left versus right began during the French Revolution, not that long ago. For more about this, I'm going to send you to Mr. Barris from the channel This is Barris. He's going to get into the history of why we have these terms. Go ahead, Barris, yeah.
This game, you're not ready for it.
Thank you for having me over, Mr. Beat. To discover the origins of the left versus right paradigm, one must go as far as the French Revolution, with the creation of the National Constituent Assembly, whose main task was to draft a constitution. Now, while France is proudly Republican today, and any trace of royalty has long been guillotined away, that wasn't always the case, and a large portion of the population supported the king, or at least those who represented that population. As such, when on November 11, 1789, the Assembly had to vote on whether the Constitution would grant the king an absolute veto or partial veto. Those who favored an absolute veto were asked to sit on the right of the President of the Assembly, while those who favored a partial veto, which was the more radical position, were asked to sit on the left. This wasn't done symbolically, but to make the vote count easier for the president, who felt a bit overwhelmed by the 1,500 deputies. And just like that, France started this idea of change versus tradition, of liberalism versus conservatism, which still shapes the political landscape to this day. In the following months, the deputies will maintain that distinction, not out of ideology, but rather necessity.
So, this was literally, like you said, it wasn't symbolic. It was just to make shit work that day. But it's funny how that, I mean, obviously they haven't got it to how it morphed into what it is today yet. But even then, it wasn't symbolic. And it's symbolic today. And I'm pretty sure it's a period where it went from being just a regular shit to people making it symbolic. But at the end of the day, that's a trap. That's a fucking trap. We're talking about, and even then, we're talking about feudalism politics. You talking about their republic today, the king. You talking about a king, though. Partial vetoes for a king. You still talking about feudalism in some sort of way. Which is also where I feel like they carried the symbolism of this forward to disguise republics as, to disguise feudalism as a republic or a democracy.
City, as the Baron de Gauville explained. We begin to recognize each other. Those who were loyal to religion and the king took up positions to the right of the chair, so as to avoid the shouts, oaths, and indecencies that enjoyed free reign in the opposing camp. Furthermore, being on the same side of the political spectrum by no means meant that you shared the same ideologies. It is often forgotten that the French Revolution started as a bourgeois revolution. The bourgeois were somewhat Republican and thus considered left-wing. However, most bourgeois also supported free market reforms and liberalism in the classical sense. And when you have proto-communists like Cassius Babeuf, who were also considered left-wing because, well, the alternative meant support of the king, you get why this might be problematic, right? It would take another century before the left versus right spectrum became popular outside of France. In the beginning of the 20th century, as revolutions sprouted across the world, the press and academics needed a quick way to categorize the different ideologies that were fighting each other, especially as these ideologies.
They needed a quick way. There's certain words like that. It's just all they needed a quick way, aka they needed a temporary way, a temporary way. It wasn't supposed to be no shit you still using 300, 200 years later.
Both left and right, became increasingly radical. For example, the Bolsheviks, who loved anything related to the French Revolution, immediately embraced the left-wing versus right-wing spectrum, although they consider themselves the centrist position. In England, however, the political spectrum took longer to become widespread, and books only started referencing it in the late 1920s. Adoption in the US was just as slow, but eventually, as partisanship increased in the 1960s during the Civil Rights Movement, the idea of a left versus right political spectrum cemented along the beliefs of both parties. And that's it, Mr. Beat. That's the story of how an overwhelmed president who needed an easier way to count his deputies ended up creating a system which now allows millennials to dismiss their uncle as a racist right-wing boomer, while he dismisses them for being triggered left-wing snowflakes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Barris. What about today?
We're gonna get to that, Mr. Beat. But shit, that was the perfect way to sum that up, bro. Like, that's literally what it's used for now. It's used as a type of like a religiously political, like rhetoric, religiously political idiocracy. Basically, like they just spit it out when they can't think of anything else to say or think of another reason to not like somebody for just being different from them. Either in your own family, like he said. So that's the reason why they are using it today. And I feel like that's the reason why it was carried on. Like they said, this shit wasn't something that was actually popular at times where real tragedies was happening. Like Great Depression and shit like that. It was happening with the logic of the people who were trying to, solve different shit in different ways, but it wasn't happening on a chart. Like, it wasn't no literal chart where you could say, oh, yeah, you over here, and this means you believe this, and that means you won't accept something from a whole nother part. It's like, that's not how it is, bro. Humans not no fucking lines.
Well, often the political spectrum looks something like this. On the left side of politics, you tend to see ideas like liberty, equality, aka egalitarianism, progress, and internationalism. On the right side of politics, you tend to see ideas like authority, hierarchy, tradition, and nationalism. On the left, you often see reform, while on the right, you often see reaction. Those on the left tend to want more government involvement to make society.
Like these are very shadowy terms in order to hide the truth. When we talking about the left and right, we're not talking about no left and right. We're not talking about a spectrum of politics. We're talking about people who probably actually want to use politics to help, or people who actually want to use politics for a socially beneficial way, or people who just want to use politics to harm people. That's really what the fuck is coming down to nowadays. Do you want to use politics to do good or do bad? If you, it really can't come down to nothing else. And there is very straightforward populist things that everybody would love if it happened. But they don't focus on that stuff. And that's not even centralism. That's actually leftism. Because that's what they call reform. So they got all of the stuff that actually progresses a society and a government on one part of the spectrum. The whole point of the government being in place is only on one part of the spectrum. The rest of the spectrum is basically like human beings fucking doing stupid shit that we already historically know is going to lead to tragedy. But they just want to do it out of what I would call ego. But you got it's a billion different words for it nowadays because they undid it to a billion trillion motherfuckers, and they don't told their family members about it and shit. And now the only time they reform is in language. They don't do it in reality. They do it in language, which is why they create the spectrum.
Society better. They want it more top-down, while those on the right tend to want less government involvement to make society better. They want it bottom-up. Ideas on the left are often called, quote, liberal, and ideas on the right are often called, quote, conservative. Of course, these generalizations are incredibly misleading, which is why this political spectrum is pretty much crap. I mean, rarely do folks fit neatly on one side or the other. For example, a person might think the government generally screws everything up when it gets too involved, yet absolutely hates nationalism or hierarchy. Often folks find themselves caught up with this weird label called, quote, centrism, because they fall somewhere in between. However, most people fall, quote, in between on most issues. Hey, can we get a better political spectrum up in here, please?
This is why I stopped shopping on Amazon, and you should too. Don't spend another dime on Amazon until you watch this first.
Watch this. I can show you how to get the sweetest deals online.
How about no?
Thanks. Okay, what's this one? Oh yes, this one was developed in the 1950s by a psychologist named Hans Eysenck. He noticed that there was something similar going on with the Nazis, who were supposed to be on the right end of the spectrum, and communist dictators, who were supposed to be on the left end of the spectrum. So he came up with these two spectrums, an R factor representing radicalism, and a T factor representing tender-mindedness. Needless to say, Eysenck's diagram had its critics. In particular, this dude, another psychologist named Milton Rokeach.
So these are psychologists' creations. And psychologists study the mind. I mean, I think if psychology study minds and behavior, I think physiologists study like patterns of behavior. Both of those career fields are very interesting. They're powerful because they're observing everything, you know. And the more you have to observe in different situations and different reactions, is the more you can make conclusions. But the conclusions for a political spectrum is definitely not this simple. And even if you had a political spectrum, there is, like I described it earlier. I'm not about to say it again. Matter of fact, if I feel like editing this video, maybe I clip it back right here just so you can hear it again, or you can just go back. At the end of the day, you don't need a spectrum. This is language warfare, psychological language warfare that they're using in order to make the population hate each other. If you follow the rules that the your forefathers set up for you, and all they slaves. If you follow their rules, you'll be good. And I'm not even trying to be fucking funny right now. I'm being serious. Like, if you follow but they don't even want to do that. Why? Because the people who are actually in power. The same feudalism system that they had back in the day. It was transferred over to another system in which the momentum of wealth was also concentrated, and now you back in the same situation because you're not juking nobody. You just running a straight line, and this nigga got uncreated cars and shit. You were still running. So these people are also in a place where they can control people from birth just by having a lot of wealth and educating them in the way that they want them to be educated. And whatever way you feel like the world should be educated, you can decide that. You as a billionaire, you can say, I want the world to be educated about religion. I'm gonna make everybody religious, you know, because that's what I want to do. That's egotism. You not first of all, for the fact that you allowed yourself to concentrate all this wealth and there's issues in the society and the people around you gonna complain about it, and instead of you saying, hey, you right, let's make this shit better for everybody, you're gonna say, no, I'm gonna actually get some of the religious people or people who basically agree that I should have this wealth, or who I've convinced that I should. I'm gonna just get them to fight you, and then I'm gonna keep going on about my day. That's what that is. It ain't got shit to do with no spectrum. That's the politics of it. I got wealth. I'm parading around like I'm a certain religious, or I believe in certain ideals, and I'm associated with certain people or groups of people, and that puts me in a certain position of power in this society. That's the politics of it right there. What am I going to do? What are the people around me going to do? The whole radical conservative shit. A conservative is a radical. You can be a radical conservative. So the wordplay in the psychological shit is already setting you up to be like, oh, a conservative is like, it make you already think conservative is better because it's the opposite of radical. It's more like, if you gonna be radical, everything that's associated with the word radical is negative. Everything associated with the word conservative is seen as wise. Everything associated with the word authoritarian is seen as negative. Everything associated with the word democratic is seen as positive. These are wordplay. This is word warfare. So I don't think it got nothing to do with the spectrum. Anyway, let's go.
Who argued the big difference between the left and right was basically that the left stressed equality more. Needless to say, Eysenck later adapted his chart to look like this, bringing an S-factor spectrum, which followed economic beliefs. Around that same time, the Nolan chart, developed by a libertarian activist named David Nolan, became a handy way for people to quickly see where they fell politically by looking at a personal freedom spectrum and an economic freedom spectrum. Yep, that's about where Nolan would have been on his own chart. And yes, today it's still heavily used in libertarian circles. The Vossum chart was a 3-axis version of the Nolan chart and looks like this. Whoa, that one looks complicated. Other 2-axis charts include the Pornell chart, developed by this dude, Jerry Pornell. On one axis, it looks at people's attitudes toward the government, or as he said, the state. On the other, people's attitudes toward social progress. But wait a second, how do you define social progress, though? Over the years, there have been tons.
This is the questions, like, it needs to be way more questions asked about stuff like this. That's the stuff that's like psychological wordplay, like semantical shit that's put out there to get in the way of people coming together and saying, hey, like, let's clean the water. Like, let's clean the air. Let's make water free. Let's make electricity free for everybody. Like, and then you can pay the people in the community to keep up with it. And now you got jobs. You working for your electricity instead of you paying for it and relying on somebody. Like, anyway, with that being said, let's just finish this video off.
of political spectrum charts, like this one, and more 3-axis versions like this one. But the problem is people won't stop fighting about which chart is best. Most of the debate centers over which axis or axes to include for each one. Wait a second. The plural of axis is axes? What the heck? Anyway, additional axes include communitarianism versus individualism, no separation of church and state versus complete separation of church and state, interventionist foreign policy versus non-interventionist foreign policy, multilateralism versus unilateralism, globalization versus protectionism, pacifism versus militarism, and centralism versus regionalism. That's a lot of isms. Again.
So when I'm looking at this, it just make me feel like, once again, like we got so many branches of government. I mean, not branches. We got 3 branches of government, but inside of the executive branch, there is many cabinets and different offices and stuff in which these people determine different things. We shouldn't allow the president to be choosing the cabinet. We should be voting on the cabinet too. That would eliminate all of this lumping together and this psychological. It forces you psychologically to lump it all together, because now you just looking at the chart. You're not thinking about, oh shit, like the cabinet and all that stuff is important. The people who are gonna be in control of these offices and stuff like that are important, just because of the fact that their execution and what they choose to focus on is going to determine the options that you and your family and your future have. Simply because they have attained enough wealth and power to be able to pay people to do whatever they say, no matter what. Simply because, and that's possible because they not investing in America themselves. They get so much wealth and power after associating with these people over a certain amount of time that they know that they dual citizens, triple duals, like all that. Identity is not a thing to them. So we're just gonna move on.
And odds are almost all of you are somewhere in the middle on all of these spectrums. So where do you fall on the political spectrum? That's right, you, with the yellow shirt. Well, I think it depends on the issue. It's not static. Chances are you are constantly moving around on the spectrum, and that's probably a good thing because it shows that you have a more open mind. If you want to know where you stand at any given time, I personally recommend the political compass. It's not perfect, but it's a pretty good start figuring out where you stand politically. There is also isidewith.com, which does a decent job of matching you up with politicians you should probably vote for, but calling someone or yourself right-wing or left-wing.
Like, this is the disaster of it. What he's not recognizing, well, personally, in my opinion, what he's not recognizing is that he's not recognizing that that is the reason why they made these political spectrums, is to eventually have it psychologically make people so confused that you are now being told who to vote for. You need to put in all these, you need to answer all these questions and get tested for them to tell you who aligns with what you want. Like, that don't make, like, God. No. You're supposed to be able to think about that. You're supposed to be able to decipher that yourself. If you can't use your community, don't use no website, bro.
Which really didn't start happening frequently in the United States until the 1920s, by the way, is almost always an oversimplification. Whenever someone says the left, or the right, or left wing, or right wing, ask them what they mean when they say that. Chances are, you ask different people, they'll give you different answers. I think those terms, left and right, can do more harm than good, and probably it's time to get rid of them. Well, what do you think, Mr. Barris?
Yeah, let's get rid of them. Because unless you are a filthy royalist, we are all technically left-wing here. And you aren't a royalist, Mr. Beat, right? Right?
Okay then.
Like, I mean, I know that was like a joke, or I don't know, it was supposed to come off as a joke, but that's some real I mean, that's basically what I was saying in the video. And I mean, it's not crazy to assume that. I mean, obviously, uh, that a person who they would say they would be on the left and on the right but if they're working class, like class issues matter more than all that other right wing associated stuff and left wing associated stuff. Like, because those are both terms obviously used by the two most powerful and wealthiest groups of individuals and families that have a following coming together and co-opting those terms and ideas. And the way that they're able to do that is through using these charts in which you are identifying with not even the chart, the whole chart. You're not identifying the whole, you're not identifying with the whole picture. You identifying with a part of the picture. Like, that's what we talking about, right? You are identifying with a part of a picture, and it's making you associate with people that you don't even know that you don't know. You really don't know. You don't give a fuck about at the end of the day, really, as long as they in your lifetime are gonna make your life easier, maybe. But that's your definition. So once again, like, if you just let people do what the fuck they want to do, or if we just all agree on that one thing, let people do what they want to do. That would get rid of when I say let people do what they want to do, obviously don't harm people. But the idea that if you could do what you want to do in a peaceful manner, then I think most people will end up finding something to do peacefully over time. And the people who can't will force them to have fun. Have fun outside of doing some fucking harmful shit, nigga. Like, that shit lame. And judging somebody for, you know, not doing some shit that you think is fun or doing some shit that you think is lame outside of harming somebody is lame. Anyway, like I said, bro, all of the political spectrum outside of the people who want to control everybody else. And when I say, I mean, have the means to also, outside of the people who have the means to control everybody else and like want to. Everybody's what they call a left winger because they want to adjust society to make it better based off of how they feel like it will be better. That's everybody. That's reform, what they would call reform. But being conservative in some people's mind is they don't even understand what the fucking word mean, I guess. Conservative means to conserve what's happening. It don't mean going back in time. It don't mean that. That's not what the word conservative mean. Even the word traditional don't mean that. Don't mean trying to go back in time and do what the fuck they was doing. It means you are carrying on something. That don't mean you going on the past. That mean you going forward. And it's always like when you conserving something, it's technically you conserve whatever the fuck is happening right now in the progress of when you were born. Because based off of what you don't know if what was happening back then was even true based off of what you was told. And that goes for everybody. So if we going based off that, we're gonna have a society full of fallacies and lies and hatred. Let's see what this man right here got to say. He got a book out. Let's see what bro got to say.
Welcome to the Institute of American.
Shout out to the Baker School of Public Policy.
American Civics, housed here at the Baker School of Public Policy and Public Affairs. My name is Josh Dunn. I'm the director of the Institute. Tonight's lecture is the last.
At your Thanksgiving dinner, unfortunately, we see it in many places. And your own anecdotal experience is backed up with data as well. So this is from the Pew Research Center. They have frequently over the years asked Americans in surveys Are you a Republican, Democrat, Independent, something else? And how do you feel about these political parties, the two major parties in America? And as you can see from this graph, there's rising partisan hostility. Just going back, if we look back about 30 years to 1994, the percentage of Republicans who had a very unfavorable view of the Democratic Party was only about 21%. Only about 1/5 of Republicans had a very unfavorable view, but it's about 2/3 of Republicans that feel that way today. And the numbers look very similar for the percentage of Democrats with an unfavorable or very unfavorable view of the Republican Party. A majority of Democrats have a very unfavorable view, and it's about 90% that have an unfavorable or very unfavorable view. Now, interestingly, as you won't be surprised.
I just got to say this. We're talking about a population in America that's majority, based off what they tell us, it's majority, white people, I would just say white people today. But yeah, it's majority white people. So we talking about people who are going to like ideological war with their cousins and brothers and sisters and stuff like that from trauma growing up, bro. Like this is what this all stemming from. Like the disagreements and stuff like that. Instead of them saying I love you, man, we can agree to disagree as long as this don't affect our voting, quote unquote. Because I don't believe in that whole voting shit. But let's say it's real today. Don't let this go into us affecting our voting and basically starting to support people who are terrible choices simply because of the fact that they are being lumped together with all these other forces under their quote unquote party. When back in the day, they knew they knew the party shit was bullshit. It's not benefiting no average working class person. They knew that. They had to go on a crazy run, like from the 80s up with Ronald Reagan and all these people to actually get the public trust to be back in presidents and the government. They had to do that. They put the work in, and now they got to this point to where it's off the charts. Well, it's not off the charts yet, but it's high on the charts.
Surprised to know that Americans who identify with one of our two major parties feel continuously pretty good about their own party. So this is from the American National Election Studies, which asks people to rate the parties on a feeling thermometer, scale of 1 to 100. 100 is the highest, best feeling you can have toward this institution or this group, and 0 is the lowest that you can have. And going back to 1964, you can see that Democrats felt really good about Democrats, about 80% back in 1964. That's about the same today. Republicans felt really good about Republicans, about 80 on a 0 to 100 feeling thermometer. They feel the same way today. But what's changed, as you can see, is the precipitous drop-off on how Democrats feel about Republicans and how Republicans feel about Democrats. In 1964, the average feeling thermometer was positive. It was above a 50 for both parties toward the out group. But today that's in the teens when this survey question is asked. So we know that there's rising partisan hostility, dislike, and anger in our politics. So why is that? Well, what we're going to argue today is not the only reason, but one of the reasons for this rise in partisan hostility in our politics is our intellectual framework. The way most people are thinking and talking about politics is causing them to have more anger and hostility toward their partisans of the opposing party. And this comes from, we think in part, what we call monism. This is the view that there's just one issue in politics. And because there's just one issue in politics, there's just two sides. And this comes from the political spectrum that Professor Dunn pointed out is taught in virtually every high school government textbook, civics textbook, says that there's a political spectrum, and you can put every individual or group in society on this spectrum, either radicals on the far left, liberals on the center left, conservatives on the center right, or reactionaries on the far right. Now, it might be surprising for you to learn that this way of thinking about politics is relatively new in American politics. So for most of American history, people did not think or talk about politics in terms of a left-right spectrum. If you go back and read the documents from the 19th century, if you're reading about Abraham Lincoln or George Washington, they never talked about politics in terms of a left-right spectrum. This is,
I mean, we got into this on a previous video, but it just made me think about it. Like, if once he said it from the point of view of most of American history, it's kind of egregious that it's being used so much nowadays. Think about it. Like, it was very party based back in the day. You had hella different parties, bro. Like, it was hella different white people coming together and making like different parties and different groups of people, not just white people, different groups of people, ethnicities and religions and all type of shit, right? They coming together, they making different type of parties, right? And they actually getting voted into government because their community is the party. Is not based off of no fucking like federal mandate in which you basing shit off of spectrum. That was something they had to put into place to make it easier for them to target and get your vote, basically. And when I say get your vote, I mean get your support for wars, mostly. For them to bank up off of selling weapons. For them to bank up off of tragedy. To slow down other societies. Slow down societies inside of their own population. So that they won't be more powerful than the party in power. Simply because of that. That's the politics of it. Simply because of that. You can't be more powerful than the party or the group of individuals in power.
Is a relatively recent phenomena, and it comes to the United States in the 1920s. It starts with...
Okay, I'm not going to watch this whole video, obviously. I'm going to go to the 10-minute mark, then I'm going to try to skip like halfway through and do like another 10 minutes.
Reporters who are going over to Russia and chronicling the Bolshevik Revolution over there. And they saw that the Bolsheviks had adopted this left-right framework that first emerged, of course, in Paris in the 1780s with the French Revolution. And so they started using that in their reporting. And eventually, by the 1920s and 30s, Americans themselves started talking about American political parties as being on a spectrum, on the left or the right. But again, even early on in the 1930s and 40s is really an elite phenomenon. Some historians, professors, journalists, but most ordinary people didn't ever think about politics in terms of a left-right spectrum. But it really begins to take off in the 1960s. And then again, since the turn of the 21st century, it's just taken off exponentially. So this is from Google Ngram Viewer. You can just see how often do these terms show up in English language publications. So if you go back to the 19th century, you might see this word left-wing or right-wing show up in reference to architecture or sports formations or military formations, but never in reference to politics. That's what's new, and that's why it's taken off in recent years. And so we all know this. We see it every day, whether you turn on television news or open a newspaper.
I don't know if it's significant or not, but it's definitely significant that the term was being carried in military circles before it became a national definition of a political spectrum. The right wing, left wing thing. That's interesting.
Or log on to social media. Everyone uses this way of thinking and talking about politics. Here's just a few examples that I took from a 3-day period in the New York Times, just a series of headlines talking about a right-wing pressure campaign, someone calling the Pope a filthy leftist, and centrist parties poised to oust a certain government in Poland. So you can see how this is just saturates the way we think about politics and talk about politics. Okay, so this left-right framework, it is it's in our language, it's in the way we talk about politics, it's everywhere. But is it the case that, well, we just need, those who are educated or those who are scholars to kind of show ordinary people the way on left-right thinking? Well, unfortunately, it's even more pronounced among the professoriate, among universities, among academics. So here's just a sampling of recent political science books that have been published. They all use this framework of left and right. If you open up a political science journal, a majority of those articles will use the terms liberal, conservative, left or right, especially if you're looking at some of the congressional research. About 80% of those journal articles use this framework of left and right, liberal and conservative.
Okay, I'm fucking with, bro. Like, if y'all haven't, please go watch this video. Obviously, you can see the title and everything right there. I'm most likely not going to put the link in the bio simply because I'm lazy. The myth of left and right. How the political spectrum misleads and harms. Okay, I'm going to go down here to the bottom to see what the chapter's talking about. That was the next chapter. Is There's more than one issue in politics. We already know that. We broke that down. The myth of the left and the right. Okay, we already know that. We broke that down. Why? Replacing the political spectrum. Let's see. Our social groups.
They're philosophically opposed to abortion, then they join the Republican Party because it's the anti-abortion party. And then they start watching Fox News.
Whoa, bro. You coming out hot.
And they hear all this stuff about tax cuts, and they hear all this stuff about opposing aid to Ukraine. And so they're socialized into the rest of the basket and told that those things go together. So that is the reason that you find tax cuts and opposition to abortion going together. It's not for philosophical reasons, but for social ones. We're not looking at trans-historical philosophies. So ultimately, we're saying that the myth of left and right, or the reason we find correlations between unrelated positions, is because of who, tribe, rather than what, philosophy.
Man, I gotta say, this video, I think I might just title this video, The Impact of Political Ignorance. The impact of political ignorance, or maybe the path to political ignorance, like something like that. Just because that's basically what he just said it. Like, we not talking about historical philosophies or philosophies in general. We not talk about what. We talking about who. That's what we talking about. We not talking about like real tangible shit.
So what we are asking for, and what we'll talk for more here about in a minute, is to use words and labels that more accurately reflect the reality. Talking about left and right deludes us. It reinforces that delusion of monism when we think we need to have a better grasp on the pluralism. Okay, let's talk briefly about what I was talking about, the historical evidence. This is really fascinating how radically left and right change. So people who say that these are philosophical concepts and that everybody in this world is born left or right and then is going to gravitate to a set of issue positions based on their birth predisposition, they have some explaining to do here because they change so rapidly. So in the 1930s, that's when the myth of left and right took off. Okay? It didn't exist prior to 1920. It was popular among mostly like historians and political scientists in the 1920s, but in the 30s, politicians started talking about conservative, liberal, right, left. Okay, so Franklin Roosevelt consciously identified himself as a liberal and on the left side of the spectrum. And what did liberal consist of back then? Well, obviously, it meant you favored Roosevelt's New Deal. But something very interesting that people don't understand is that to be liberal also meant to oppose civil rights, strangely. Why was that? Because Franklin Roosevelt's base of support was in the South, which was more segregationist at the time. Okay. Furthermore, it was considered right-wing to oppose war.
Yeah, people don't like FDR. He got a whole bunch of respect down here. He got hella goddamn shit named after him, bro. Especially Georgia.
When Franklin Roosevelt was building up the armaments for World War II, people like Charles Lindbergh spoke out against it, and he was considered an extreme right-winger. He never spoke out against the New Deal. He didn't make statements based on segregation or anything like that. It was all of his anti-war stance. That's fascinating. That would change pretty dramatically over the coming century. You can go back and find supporters of the New Deal who were segregationists who were attacked for their segregationism, who belonged to the Ku Klux Klan, for instance, and they were attacked for their Klan membership, and the attackers were considered right-wing. So attacking a racist back then was considered to be a conservative thing. All right, of course.
So when we say attacking this, like he's also lumping together right and conservative, because that's, I mean, two different things in my opinion. But you're forced to in this situation because that's how the population does it, and it's just interesting because conservatives really don't acknowledge this. Like back in the day, it used to be like left-wing people. The left used to be more dedicated to the government, and then over time, during like 40s all the way up to like basically 2016, 2010 type shit, when Obama got into office, I guess, the Conservative Party was the party that was dedicated. They was like loyal as fuck to the government. Like, you can't deny that. And all the fucked up shit that was responsible or happened at that time is on their hands. And not to say that it wasn't both sides doing the shit, because that's where the illusion is at. Because it was what they call both sides, because both sides, it's hilarious. Both sides, both parties are in the same class mostly. They're in the same class. And if they're not in the same class, they have the access to a better class. Way better class. Like valedictorian class type shit. So I just wish that everybody acknowledged that part. And that would make the whole spectrum go away right there. When people realize how this timeline, basically, it's just flipping back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. One person saying, oh yeah, you love the government, you suck, what's wrong with you? Then the other person be like, no, I don't, I fucking hate the government. And then over time, you trying to prove the other thing to the other side, and you just going back and forth the whole time.
Of course, in the 1960s, that had changed quite dramatically, and you can see that more and more issues would come online. But the point we're trying to make here is not only that there's more than one issue, but what is considered left and right, those bundles are always changing. It's as if you have the two grocery carts, and you take the kale from one basket and throw it into the other basket, disproving the idea that kale is somehow philosophically connected to all the other groceries in that basket. If it was philosophically connected, then why did it switch? All right, now, why does this model persist? Now, obviously, we mentioned because it explains why seemingly unrelated issues go together. Of course, the social theory explains that much better. But why do people cling to a political spectrum? Why can't we do like we have done in every other complex realm of life and accept pluralism rather than monism? The first and most obvious answer is simplicity. It's the same reason that doctors used to embrace not a medical spectrum, but a four humors theory. Telling somebody that all of health was just about getting four humors in balance, that made the world comprehensible. That made things easy. We like easier models. Complexity disturbs us, and we'll sometimes prefer a complex lie to a complex truth. Excuse me. We'll prefer a simple lie to a complex truth. Okay. Second, and one of the main things that it's happening today is it disguises our tribalism. You see, if you want to be a Democrat and support everything the Democratic Party does, it doesn't feel very good to say, I'm a tribal lemming. I just support all of these things because I can't think for myself. Nobody wants to say that, okay? But if you can say, I support all of these things because I'm a progressive and believe in social justice, that makes you feel much better about being a partisan. And therefore, you can go along with everything your tribe does and check all the boxes and feel like I'm supporting the cause of progressivism. It's a much better sell. It makes us feel better. I mean, we've known for centuries, even millennia, that human beings are tribal. You know, Aristotle recognized this. But what has come to light in just the past couple of decades is how deeply committed we humans are to disguising our tribalism. It's the elephant and the rider metaphor, right? The elephant is taking us where it wants to go. That's the emotions. And then we afterwards convince ourselves, well, that's where we wanted to go all along. So we come up with stories to explain. And so the tribalism has always been there, but now we like to disguise our tribalism. And so the left-right spectrum is an excellent way to cover our partisan sins. All right.
We're cooking. Like,
and then third, it's not just that we have individual incentives because we're lazy. We don't want to think. We want.
Like, I feel like I don't have to watch the rest of this video simply because, like, I don't know how to put it, besides the fact that I said everything he about to say in this video, but he's doing it more in depth. I don't need that. But if you please, y'all go watch this video. I'm about to end this episode right quick. Hard close. With that being said, y'all go watch this video right here, bro. It's gonna make the whole situation better. And I feel like this situation right here, in America, the most fucked up part of America is this idea. There's nothing more fucked up than this idea than the fact that we're lumping together all these ideas into one thing, but trying to say it is in a disguise of like okay, on the spectrum you got all these different parts, and that is to disguise the fact that you have so many different options and freedoms in life to do and live so many different paths. Yeah, you do. Optionally, you can do what you want to do. That's just human nature. But once you are being put in a certain environment that's set up for you, it's not no option really. It's really just based off of what situation you was fucking born in, and then outside of that, you make the best out of that. You can either make the best or the worst, but it's really based off of the power structure that you're under, unless you just gonna go ballistic on motherfuckers. Ballistic mode. So they say, in democracy, you got all these different ideas and parties, and that's why you got freedom of speech and ideas, but you only got two parties, though. Now, everything has been centralized more and more and more, and they using this spectrum as a fucking type of spell or some shit, like a way to confuse people, to distract them, so that we don't recognize that point. We don't recognize the part that everything is being more and more centralized, because we got the spectrum telling us that there's so many different options, and if you don't want to be a Democrat or Republican, then you can be a third party. Obviously, you're not going to get no fucking power like we got, but that's just because you can't have more power than the party that's in power, bro. Like, you can't be more lit. You can't be more lit than us. If your party's more lit than our party, matter of fact, we not even gonna talk like that. That's not gonna happen. If your party start getting a little bit as lit as my party is, I'm sending 12 over there. Shut it down. They music too loud. But they music loud as fuck too. Bruh, you must not hear right. They music ain't too loud, bro. Ain't nobody complaining about they music. So it can't be that loud type shit. So if you try to get more power than the party that's in power, you're going to be fucking squashed. And you're going to become, either you're going to be squashed or you become a little bitty puppet, little bitty dolly doll of the actual power, the powers at hand. And those have been centralized into two different parties, the right and the left. And they have decided through their centralization of power, I would rather only have one person to fight than to have 20 different people to fight. They decided that a long time ago, the power structure. And the more that they can eliminate all these other ideas outside of the spectrum, is the more they can secure one of them being the eventual victors. So it's just a tragedy, bro. Like, when they say that the cycle of civilizations and all that shit, like, I think this is a part of it. Like, obviously people start, identifying with stuff that really don't matter in order to distract themselves from the fact that they're giving into feudalism again. It's happening again. We giving into feudalism again. We was fighting this shit. We got a little freedom where everybody was happy. Oh, damn. The same people that we was turning up with concentrated all the power and wealth. And now they acting like we ain't turn up with them. And when we turn up with them, they acting like we better be grateful. Like, we ain't have nothing to do with this shit. Like, we just got to be their children. Nigga, I'm older than you. No, you still my child. Nigga, I'm wiser than you. No, you still got to listen to what I say, because technically I've convinced most of the people that there's a system at hand that actually benefits them, to where they chose me to be in power, but they didn't even choose me to be in power, even if they didn't. So I gotta have a whole waiter. I gotta have a waiter party. I always gotta have a party, like, if I don't get into office, I'm the Democrat. If I don't get into office, I always gotta have that Republican Party over there waiting to take all of the complaints and collect them and to put them in power, so that those individuals who had those issues with both of the parties don't start their own party and start fucking gaining power and abandon both of us. They won't support both of the parties no more. They gotta always have a person on there completely doing the complete opposite of whatever the fuck the person thinking, the complete opposite of whatever the fuck the person in the office is thinking. Because if you're not doing that, then technically you're not killing enough people. If you destroying the world well enough, you're gonna piss off enough people, especially inside of your own country. And when you do that, you gotta have the other party there to listen to those complaints and say, you know what, y'all, we right, bruh. Y'all right. Those are fucked up things going on in the world, and I'm gonna change it. And then when they get into power, they don't really change shit. Besides securing their pockets and their class. And that's the politics of it. It ain't no fucking squares and lines and angles and shit. X, Y axis and spectrums. It ain't no spectrum. It ain't no spectrum. It's a mental illness at this point. The left-right shit. Lumping all that shit together like a child, bruh. Shit don't make no fucking sense. Grow up, bruh. With that being said, peace. Y'all like, share, subscribe, all that shit.